Hi, I'm Greg Lavender, CTO at VMware. I'm here today to share with you some of my experiences and observations about how to get IT done while also doing innovation. And those two things can sometimes be disruptive to each other. And I want to make sure that you get a perspective on how I look at it at VMware. So generally the CTO mission, not just mine, but any CTO, has a goal of creating a future of disruptive technologies and enabling a culture of perpetual innovation. I like to say, as a CTO, I have sort of really three goals. One is I'm the Chief Technology Officer, which is the mission I know and love, having been in technology for many, many years. And also sometimes I'm the Chief Talking Officer, giving presentations such as this one, meeting with customers and explaining our technology, our strategy, and our vision, and how to basically execute a transformation. And then finally, I call myself the Chief Therapy Officer, both for customers and sometimes for employees. And I mentor many people, both inside and outside the company, to really help them understand how to drive innovation in their own jobs and their own activities so that they can basically advance the state of the art. But we want to make sure that we do that without breaking anything. So let me just give you a perspective on what I mean by culture of innovation. We all operate in an environment that basically is the contextual environment or the background environment in which we have to innovate and have to get IT done. And so I like to refer back to one of my favorite authors, David Foster Wallace, who gave a commencement speech along this theme. And essentially, if you start the left panel, you have this old fish swimming along, and he comes upon two new fish. And he says, "Good morning, colleagues. How are you doing?" They read him back. He says, "How's the water?" And they go, "What's the water?" So as a long-time 38-year internet engineer and technology person, I've always always maintained the context of where you're operating and kind of what's the next future step. So you have to sort of understand what the water is so that you are swimming in the right part of the water and you're swimming forward, not against the current, but with the current of change that's happening across the innovations landscape. And so we'll continue to dig into this topic. So today, innovation happens everywhere. I used to work at Sun Microsystems. Scott McNeely was the CEO, great leader. And Scott used to tell us all the time, look, smart engineers, innovation happens elsewhere too. If you don't pay attention to that, the classic innovator's dilemma, you're going to get blindsided. And so I've learned over the course of my career, both in academia, in research labs, in startups, and in major tech companies like Sun Microsystems, Cisco, VMware, and I spent 6 years at Citibank, is that you have organic innovation, which tends to come from the smart technical people you have in the organization. Sometimes it's a business innovation, sometimes it's a process innovation, sometimes it's a technology innovation. And of course, we all get the benefits of the innovation that happens in open source. It can be a two-edged sword there. It's good innovation, but sometimes it's unstable. There's no commercial support. Sometimes the open source has security issues in it, but because it's there for all to see and all to read the code, if you're so inclined, we can get a lot of innovation value out of that. And certainly commercially supported innovation for large enterprises is really critical, so that you have both the open source version, which garners a lot of innovation from outside the company that does the commercial support, but you also have commercial support as an enterprise when you need upgrades, patches, and fixes. And of course, there's a rich startup ecosystem that's now global. It's not just in Silicon Valley, it's happening all over the world. And that innovation as well, as it matures and becomes relevant in the wider industry through acquisitions, IPOs, et cetera, you can inorganically bring that technology into your company, as we've done at VMware through a number of acquisitions. But also we can invest in startups to basically accelerate some of this technology advancement that comes out of the startup ecosystem. And actually, from my perspective, I've learned, having spent 6 years on the customer side, not just on the tech side, is listening to your customers, listening to your partners, particularly systems integrators, about the kinds of problems that your technology or your products need to solve as you bring them together to create solutions, because businesses and enterprises want solutions, not just technology. I sort of make the analogy as, if I give you a Lego kit of parts, right, and I don't give you a manual and I don't give you a picture of what you're supposed to build, you'll build something, but it may not be the right thing. And so it's really important that I think to have solution definitions, solutions architecture, and as you assemble all the technology that the industry has been creating for all of us, that you basically don't create a monstrosity. You create something that's lifecycle managed, that's secure, it's scalable, and it evolves with your business. So it's really important to have that customer and partner feedback into your product R&D and into your innovation R&D to make sure that you align with best practices and make it easy for customers to consume your technology. And then finally, I would say, competition in the industry is good. It forces all of us to basically advance our technology, to stay competitive. And the biggest disruption that's been happening for the last several years, obviously, is cloud technology, mobile technology, and underlying that is, software-defined everything. And so really the whole software-defined motion in the industry is creating a number of advantages. Most importantly, we can innovate at the speed of software. There's still a lot of semiconductor and hardware innovation that's going on, maybe at a slower pace, but the software is kind of driving the direction and pulling, in many ways, the hardware technology forward. So innovation is not owned by anybody. It's happening everywhere, and that's to the benefit of customers and keeps technology companies like VMware innovating as well. So, a question I get asked all the time is, how do you harness innovation without being too disruptive? Again, having worked at a large multinational financial, it's a regulated industry. One of the senior executives once told me, says, Mr. Lavender, we want you to innovate and drive us into the future, but we've been in business for over 200 years. Don't break it. And so it's really important to have that business context, that resiliency context, in everything that you do as you bring in new innovation and disrupt yourselves, but don't disrupt yourselves fatally. So I have these basic principles which I've adopted and I apply here at VMware, which is this very idea of co-investing, is that it's not your problem, it's not my problem, it's our problem. And so you got to be able to catalyze disruptive innovation. No one organization is going to have all the ideas. So really at VMware, we try and basically have this idea of I co-invest to catalyze new things to happen, but I don't do it over in the closet. I do it across the company by investing in areas that I think need to be forward moving, but maybe 12 or 18 months beyond the roadmap of the current product roadmaps that the product teams are developing. So I always like to get a little ahead, so let's call it in the 18-month, the 3-year horizon to do that disruptive innovation. And I also have a research group that's in sort of the 3 to 6 year investment horizon that's out ahead of even what's happening today. For example, I'll talk about in a little bit, but 5G is the new thing. Well, we're investing in 6G, thinking that's going to be completely software defined. The other is co-innovating, right? Is again, investing in the people, their ideas and technologies. At VMware, we have an internal R&D innovation offsite we host every year. It used to be an in-person exclusive event for the top 2,000 engineers in the company. This year, because of COVID, we did it for all of R&D, including our partners at Dell Technologies. And we had over 13,000 people virtually participating in the largest private internal innovation offsite in the company's history. And the ideas that come out of that lead to new product features, new products potentially, a slew of patents, published papers and from the research topics. It's really a way of amplifying and creating that culture of perpetual innovation I mentioned earlier. And so really, it's, innovation doesn't happen anymore by the sort of the really smart people in the garage. I mean, smart people, in their garage will do interesting things, but if you want to innovate at large scale, you need to have a culture of it that's pervasive in your organization. And then finally, I've learned a long time ago working in a nonprofit research lab that you can invent lots of new ideas, but if you don't have partnerships with the commercial markets and the companies that are going to absorb that innovation, then you may not see the light of day. You really have to have a collaborative idea of building relationships across the entire ecosystem, which sometimes can be with partners that are also somewhat competitors. And so, I think the whole trend in the industry of open APIs and microservices and opening up interfaces to allow others to get the benefits of your technology and platform as they build larger ecosystems is an important part of innovating. So let me dive into a little bit about sort of this idea of the ecosystem model. I think it's really important as well to understand what your goals are. We want to be both a technology visionary, but a trusted advisor, a co-innovation partner. And at VMware, we're particularly focused on doing tech for social good. And so this is an example of an ecosystem model where you have internal partners, could be IT, could be product teams, could be your sales force, could be your corporate development, helping you with startups or acquisitions. You have external, you have joint innovation labs that happen in industry, academia, other innovation partners, like I mentioned, the open source community and other technology leaders. And I'll give you some examples of the kind of innovation we do at VMware as I go forward. And the important thing is to have that feedback loop. So let me talk a little bit about from the customer perspective, right? The daily challenges facing the CIO. There's a whole bunch of these, the multi-cloud landscape. Everyone wants better customer experience, certainly during the work from home time of COVID. And of course, we're all competing for the same talent and the skills resources. And of all the things that the CIO has to deal with, the one that I hear over and over again from customers that's the biggest challenge is the management of the legacy mountain of current things you have. And it's consuming anywhere from 80 to 90% of the budget. So therefore, often makes it difficult to transition forward. So, and then you often have headwinds, right? There's various headwinds like fast tech change, global privacy regulatory shifts, changing customer expectations, and perhaps most importantly, the cybersecurity threats. And then, so let's take a look at what that legacy mountain looks like. I'm going to rely on Bruegel the Elder's Renaissance painting of the Tower of Babel. I think it's a very good allegorical image to kind of impose my own allegorical story on this famous painting, which is in the Art History Museum in Vienna. If you've never seen it, when you can travel again, it's worth seeing. What's fascinating about this is, if you think about it, this is sort of emblematic or symbolic of IT. As technology evolves, you tend to sort of build on what you had in the past, i.e. the water I mentioned before. And so it's always under construction. It's almost never done. And of course, at the top layers is sort of the applications. We're trying to reach the cloud. But you need this sort of infrastructure foundation. It needs to be well architected. It needs to be agile. We all want agile. And you need to be able to sort of expand and grow and pivot and change as you do this. But of course, if you've got this legacy foundation, then it sometimes makes it harder. Now, as I said, I was a longtime internet guy. And those of you that know about the OSI layered model of network protocols, in fact, early days of Interop, I used to attend back in the late 80s, early 90s. And this is a picture of a t-shirt I have from the IETF, where you have at the bottom, the lowest layer of this Tower of Babel, you have the physical layer. Then you have if you go up each layer, you have the link layer, the network layer, the transport layer, the session layer, the application layer, the financial layer. And then of course, at the top, you have the political layer, and that's where you are. And we all have to deal with that in terms of driving transformation or driving change. So there's a great analogy here to say that the OSI reference model maps completely onto this Tower of Babel, which this painting was painted in the early 16th century. So, but it gives a representative example of like what we're dealing with. And of course, embedded into the foundation of this Tower of Babel is at least one mainframe that basically holds you hostage, perhaps, as you want to try and innovate because it's running such mission critical workloads. You can't just rip it out. If you rip it out, the whole thing collapses. I'll come back to this in a minute. So there's also this inhibitors to rapid change, which I'm sure you're aware of, is org misalignment. So I'll use Escher's famous relativity graphic that shows the idea of Einsteinian relativity, in which different groups or different functions are operating in their own frame of reference. We would call them silos today. So many organizations, if you go inside the Tower of Babel, you have a secondary problem, which is that the organizations aren't aligned, and perhaps you have a lack of talent, and you also have time and budget challenges. So what a lot of organizations do is they make the mistake of not changing the business processes when they apply the technology. For example, automation. If you automate the organizational misalignment, you have misaligned automation. And so I like to represent that with sort of the Legoization of that same picture. If you basically use robotics process automation, other types of automation, or you outsource it, and you didn't really fix the alignment problem, you just end up with a more modern version of misalignment. And you may or may not have the right talent as well. And on the time and budget challenges, if I go back to the Tower of Babel example, if you may not have noticed, in the bottom left-hand corner is a very important allegorical picture, part of the picture, is you have the king in the middle, i.e. the CEO, and to your right and to the king's left is the finance minister whispering into the king's ears to slash the budget. And notice that you have a priest standing behind the king, right? And there's a bunch of men with lances, sharp pointed spears. And, there's another gentleman probably telling, off with their heads. And on their hands and knees, begging for more time and money to finish the project, is the CIO, the CTO, and the head of infrastructure, the head of apps. And you have all the workers chiseling away to try and finish the project before the budget runs out and before your heads get cut off. And so we've all lived this reality on sort of these high pressure projects and technology transformations. So you got to have a well-laid plan, or otherwise you end up in the wrong place. So, so again, if I think about this idea of what happens is, is entropy is the what often leads to decay. And so we go back to our picture about the operating environment and the challenges for the CIO and the headwinds we're facing. Well, some more entropy showed up in the form of COVID, right? How many of us basically have spent the last 6 months, I certainly have, working 12 to 14 hours a day, trying to help our customers make this transition to a more agile, more work from home world. And I can, could spend the rest of the talk to give you lots of stories, but I'll just say that some of the most sort of profound comments I've heard is from a CIO who said, we spent the last 6 months debating a bunch of sort of infrastructure changes and how to get to cloud and how to be more agile. And we weighed all the pros and cons, and each of the people in their own silos or frames of reference were arguing about what to do. And when COVID hit, we made the decisions in 1 week, executed it, and now we're done. So the question really for the new CIO is, well, why can't this be the new normal? Why do, after COVID, let's not go back to the old way of having indecisions. We can innovate, we can be disruptive, but we didn't break anything. We actually made it better, and we made the speed and the process better as well. And people probably learned a lot, so skill levels increased. So entropy often shows up into an unplanned way as opposed to a planned way. So let's talk a little bit more about entropy, right? I think entropy enables innovation. If you think about it, here's a quote from Stephen Hawking, is that disorder entropy always increases with time. For example, the Tower of Babel. In other words, it's a form of Murphy's Law that things tend to go wrong. And here's just a flow diagram. You go from order to entropy, and it takes a lot of energy, to input into the disorder to get back to a state of order. And then if you're not careful, you end up in chaos, and we've all lived through some examples of those. And then you sort of like bring order back into the chaos by applying energy to get back to an ordered state. So I have a favorite haiku that I've actually modified here to sort of describe this very succinctly. Hope you'll appreciate it, which is chaos reigns within. That's the disorder. Refactor, recode, and reboot. Order shall return. That's the flow of this diagram. Maybe. Sometimes it doesn't, and we end up in a bad place. But we all have to work against entropy. But entropy is an opportunity, as I gave the example of the CIO, to basically execute a change in the way you do things. So let's talk a little bit about velocity. Technology and business velocities are often mismatched. The business wants to go fast, the technology can't keep up. Sometimes the technology is moving faster than the business, and you get ahead of yourselves. The business doesn't know how to take advantage. The application teams are stuck in the old model. They're not adapted to the new cloud model. This becomes a problem. I like this example of a highway interchange to kind of represent this. On my commute home from the VMware offices to where I live, I go by an exit where I should get off that backs up a lot because a lot of people are exiting at that location. I actually drive past that exit and I take the exit loop that sends me in the opposite direction. The exit's going east, I take the loop that takes me west. But I then immediately, when I cross over the freeway, get back on the loop back onto the freeway and then take the exit that's actually going east. And then I have right of way, so I bypass all of that slowdown and I basically speed past them, going in the direction I wanted to go instead of getting into the line. So sometimes you have to optimize and innovate to think ahead of the direction of where other people are going. So business can exceed the speed of tech change, and tech change can exceed the speed of the business. You want to try and get those two things aligned, and don't do tech without understanding how the business accelerates or how you help the business accelerate with those tech changes. Now, some strategic levers, I think, that are for risk management reasons, you need to pay attention to. And I sort of take these as like economics. Everybody cares about economics. I've learned in my career that you can actually make things better, faster, safer, more secure for less money. It seems an oxymoron, but in fact, that's the case. You just have to rethink, where the cost structures are and how to optimize those. And clouds give us a number of choices to allow us to make those economic trade-offs of CapEx to OpEx. But you can do a lot to optimize your current environment to make it cheaper, and then use the cloud services as another optimization point in your architecture. Same with scalability, right? As consumer demand goes up, you need more scalability. Don't build another data center. Adopt a hybrid cloud. Go to some public cloud. Go to a colo facility. There's lots of ways to scale out, but you also have to make sure that you scale up the back end if you're scaling out the front end. And speed and reliability, I mentioned the speed of the business. When you go faster, make sure that as you remove latency and you remove speed bumps, which can be process or organizational, you really want to make sure that that you don't drop things onto the floor, particularly security. So that's a problem. And I'll talk about intrinsic security in a minute. Basically, it's a predator-prey viral landscape out there, and we all have to deal with it. Finally, innovating for business value without breaking anything. This is just a quick flow diagram to say, as you go to X as a service model, whether it's infrastructure as a service, which primarily benefits IT, or dev time to market, which primarily benefits app dev through platforms as a service, containers as a service, functions as a service, and new DevOps models, you can start to accelerate because you have scalable infrastructure. You can accelerate your application development and time to market. Everybody wants to get more money out of their data. So people are always doing data monetization, excuse me. And we want to be able to get to the use of more and more SaaS services to give us some more choices and not have to run everything or build everything ourselves. And then finally, all of those things done together well will lead to real business delivery and business tech alignment at the same speed, like I said before. So now I just briefly want to sort of show you an example. I can't go through all of these. These are all the technology areas, at least that I pay attention to in the Office of CTO at VMware. And many of these, will be relevant topics in and of their own. But I want to just focus on one set, which is this idea of intrinsic security, crypto agility, and zero trust computing. I'm going to focus mostly on crypto agility because I think it's going to be the most interesting for this audience at this time. Let me give you an example of intrinsic insecurity. Many of you remember the OpenSSL heartbleed bug that bit us a few years ago. I spent millions of dollars and many man hours and people hours basically driving this bug out of the ecosystem, and it existed in many vendor products that they had to remediate. It took months to really get this bug out of the environment. And if you read the history of this, the developer that checked in this bug claimed that it was New Year's Eve, so therefore he implied that he was drinking, and therefore the mistake he made wasn't really his fault. It was due to being New Year's Eve. But that bug affected almost every company in the world because that open source technology was highly embedded in the environment. And a professor at Princeton University said, the basic problem is that we don't design systems in a way that basically they have an immune system that keeps those kinds of problems from really hurting us. And so the most recent sort of bugaboo in this area is this idea was, will quantum computing break current cryptography? So there's been various announcements recently from Google, IBM, et cetera, about quantum computing. IBM just had an article last week, in fact, that they're going to have a 1,000 qubit quantum computer by 2023. And there's a book that's out that everybody's reading called The Cryptography Apocalypse. Whether that's true or not, I can't comment on, but I think it's a provocative title, but it's actually a good book that sort of gives you the basis for what's really going on. But let's dig into this a little bit more and see what's the thing we really need to do today if we're going to have a quantum computing by 2023. And 1,000 qubits not going to crack your current crypto. We need to have at least 2,300 qubits for that. But IBM has also announced that they're going to have a million qubits later. And I won't talk about the error correcting capabilities you need to make that work. Scott Aronson, who's a professor at UT Austin, has said this: isn't this a big overhyped nothing burger? It's not an everything burger, but it's certainly at least a something burger. In other words, you've got to pay attention to it. So let's talk a little bit more about this, right? So if you look at the current crypto that we have today, both symmetric key and public key, what you really want to have is this idea of crypto agility, which is the ability to change out these algorithms when you need to change them out, whether you have a quantum computer or not. And we've got to worry about this because when you get to 2,300 qubits, our public keys become vulnerable. Our symmetric keys are okay as long as you increase the key length. So we need some new algorithms, and those are being worked on. So we're potentially facing a Y2Q. It's like Y2K, except it's Y2Q. Whether it happens or not, still some speculation. There's a lot of hype about this, but are we ready or not? And so the real question is, okay, if the timeline basically puts us out into, let's say 2030, where we really got to start worrying about this, maybe sooner, we don't know. What do we need to do now? Well, the answer now is there's already proposed algorithms that are called quantum resistant, devised by various standards libraries to get us to a point of what we call quantum readiness. I call it the something burger, using Scott Aronson's terminology. So essentially what we need is product crypto agility today. So what we have to innovate on at VMware and what the industry has to innovate on is basically making it so that we can change out the cryptographic software quickly so that we can get ahead of this problem, maybe give customers time to migrate and change. So the final thing is, how do you modernize all that infrastructure and services and applications? By innovating without breaking anything. And you can do it. I've done it before. We can help you. And here's the way you do it. You don't throw it out. You basically refactor it, you recode it, right? You reboot it, and you achieve that goal. So finally, VMware's strategy and vision is essentially to enable that. I gave you some examples of the innovation technologies that we use to achieve it. And our intrinsic security goes across all of our products. So I hope you've enjoyed this short presentation. I know I've gone through it very quickly, and there'll be some time for Q&A. I just want to leave you with one more thought, and maybe I can come back next year and talk about it. I'm also working on this thing called intrinsic sustainability. We need to be more green because of the climate change impact, and we're going to do this across our entire product portfolio in the future. Watch this space. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your thoughts and ideas on innovation. I'm Lenny Heyman, I'm the Interop Content Director, and we're so glad to have you here today. And I've got a few questions, and hopefully we get some from the audience as well. You know, innovation has been really the watchword for us at Interop from the very beginning, of course. And even this year in putting together the program, I'm just amazed at how many things are going on, from cloud to AI, ML ops, this and that. It's really an exciting time for innovation within the technology and IT space. So again, thank you for sharing so many great ideas. Let's go back a little bit to your talk. There's so much in there. You threw down some very large numbers toward the end around security. And so I guess my question is, should I worry, or is that an enabler, those big numbers in terms of where innovation goes in the future?
Well, I think one key takeaway there is, even today, you want to increase your key sizes for anything that's encrypted, particularly encrypted data, whether it's on-prem, at your home, or in the cloud. There are bad actors out there that are, anticipating the emergence of quantum cryptography or post-quantum crypto, and could be collecting or stealing data today that's encrypted with like AES 256. Which will, in a very short order would be broken. So going to 1024, 2048-bit key lengths even today is a good proactive move that you can do to encrypt your data. That just buys you, hopefully more time. But the whole point of crypto agility is the industry needs to address this seriously and bring that capability across the entire technology portfolio. So that when and if we have a vulnerability in an algorithm independent of a quantum computer, that we can swap those algorithms out and not have to be a painful process. And at the same time, we got to give customers enough lead time with crypto agility, and upgrades of products could take 3 to 5 years to get the industry upgraded, even if we started next year. In the anticipation, should we have a quantum computer that is effective, and you really need more than 2,000 qubits, you need 4,000 qubits because of quantum error correction. So I won't go into all the details. Maybe that's a subject of a future Interop talk.
Yeah, that's exciting. Hey, you also left us with just a little bit of a note around sustainability. Can you talk us through how sustainability and innovation work together?
Yeah, I think sustainability is just one piece of the larger ESG, environmental social governance, that's emerging as part of corporate responsibility across all industries. We take this very seriously at VMware, both the social and governance part. But we have a great team of PhDs in sustainability that are helping advise and lead the company in what we do in this area. And already our Palo Alto campus is we're already carbon neutral, but we have a goal by 2030 to be net zero. You can Google if you don't know what that means. And we have lots of solar. We're installing lithium-ion battery containers on our campus to give us battery backup capability. But we got to bring it into the product portfolio. And I think the whole industry is moving this direction. Google, Microsoft, Amazon have all announced sustainability in their clouds. We're the biggest provider of private cloud and hybrid cloud technologies today. So we're bringing that we want to bring that technology into our core portfolio as well, so that our customers get the benefit of improving their carbon stance, decarbonizing their data centers. And it's not just in the infrastructure. There's work to be done in the application layer, in the networking layer, in the infrastructure layer, and at the in-device layer. So a lot of work to be done here across the industry. Both VMware and Dell Technologies are aggressively pushing in this direction, and we encourage the whole industry to do so as well.
for users? Is it as easy as or simple as moving to the cloud in terms of getting some points on sustainability, or are there other things they can do?
Well, I think, just as we've seen in the last 6-7 months with COVID, I've in my first 2 years at VMware, I've been there 2.5 years, I flew over 500,000 miles around the world visiting customers as CTO of the company. And in the last 6 months, I've visited 200 customers virtually. So look at all the carbon I've saved by not flying, driving to the airport. We're not commuting into work. So all of us are contributing, during social distancing, despite the negative social impact that it's had on our lives, greatly reduced our consumption of carbon. And a good friend of mine in London said he's seen wildlife, fowl and other wildlife on the Thames River that he's never seen before after living for 35 years in London. Wow. So the planet can recover pretty quickly if we stop burning fossil fuels.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, we're getting some comments from our attendees about your clever and sharp OSI shirt. What's the story behind that?
Oh, well, good luck trying to find one of those. I was a member, I was going to IETF meetings back in the 80s and 90s, earlier days of the internet. I started out in 1983 as an internet software engineer. And Interop, in fact, I was at the Interop in '88 in San Jose and subsequent Interop conferences back in the day. So when you go to IETF meetings, you'd see people wearing that shirt. So I don't know. Ask the Interop people to reproduce one. Maybe it'll regain popularity.
I'll work on that. Thank you. Hey, a lot of our attendees come from a variety of size of companies. You've had experience at large enterprises and, of course, large vendors as well. If someone's working at a smaller organization, what can you tell them or suggest they can do to ensure that they're innovators and they can they don't have the same scale that you've described in your organization today?
Yeah, well, obviously I talked about the different facts and ways in which innovation happens everywhere. And obviously I'm sure everyone's using open source. My advice is always to use commercially supported open source so that when there are problems, you can get commercial support for it. But clearly open source is very transformational technology in industry. Everyone's using open source versions of Kafka or Terraform or Ansible and other types of technologies. I always encourage any enterprise to de-risk those open source projects with commercial supported agreements with the commercially supported providers of those technologies. The industry is very good at quickly commoditizing key innovations. We announced last week at VMworld partnership with NVIDIA around GPUs and our VMware technology. Machine learning, AI, this technology is very rapidly commoditizing where you can do very powerful AI and ML, on your laptop, on your desktop computers. You don't need, if you're a big enterprise, you need 2,000 GPUs in Google Cloud or one of the other clouds. That's you got to go pay for that. You got to rent it. You don't have to buy it. But there's so much innovation that can happen because of the compute power, the storage density, and the general lower economics of computing technologies. I probably have 6 computers here in my own office, that I use for various things. So the commoditization of technology as it expands and grows, the innovations in the semiconductor space continue unabated, despite Moore's law. So there's just so much opportunity at a relatively low cost to get the latest technologies and apply them in a productive way for society and your business.
And in these times of working apart, is it more difficult to stay involved with the business? And in fact, businesses today, many of them are companies that produce technology on their own within the product areas. So what does that say about the role of the IT professional in terms of actually driving innovation? What is their role in that equation? And how do they stay now close to the business to ensure that they're part of the conversation?
Every of the hundreds of customers I've met with, the ones that were the application developers and the infrastructure IT people are kind of working hand in hand are the ones that are accelerating and the fastest. And I think transforming their businesses, with the latest technologies without, as I said, without breaking anything. And so I think, historically, sometimes IT was at sort of on one side of the fence and app dev or the business was on the other side of the fence. And IT was always sort of a cost center. But in many organizations now, the CIO is at the same table with the business leaders, the CEO, the CFO, driving the business strategy that's technology enabled. And so, again, I think the bigger problem is you have a lot of choice. So what choices do you make? And I've never been one to follow the herd. So I'm always sort of a contra fund investor in the sense that, look at the thing that's not what everybody else is doing. That's often where you're going to find the next innovation.
Just about a minute left. Any one innovation, anything that you didn't describe in your talk today that is really exciting for you that you can share with us?
Yeah, one of the things I'm most proud about the work we've done in the last several months at VMware and before that was, as everyone went to work from home as a result of that COVID entropy that got introduced unexpectedly, we've really helped the medical field, both, I'll call it telemedicine, and there's other names for it, but being able to help hospitals, first responders, medical organizations so that doctors can work remotely. SD-WAN is the technology that we provide for that, as well as our virtual desktop and virtual computing environments. We call it Workspace ONE. Those technologies have really helped transform, government that doesn't have a lot of budget to spend, the medical profession, rapidly expanding hospital facilities to create additional beds. So I think technology and being able to deliver this through the cloud is really a great convergence point. If we had not had, as an industry, if we had not had all of these technologies like Zoom, which we're using, and virtual conference platforms like you're using for this conference, if we hadn't had that, it would be a very different world. So tech innovation continues unabated, and technology adoption is accelerating to basically, allow businesses to operate at the speed of software.
That's fantastic. And that's a great last word. Thank you so much, Greg, for spending time with us and sharing some great insights on innovation. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. This is the last day of Interop Digital. Hope you enjoy this program and take advantage of all our other conference sessions today and sponsored content, and visit our business hall as well. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.